Hey everybody, welcome back. So today we're going to be walking through a beginner OKTA Homelab that I designed around a small local sales rep portal. Now, the portal is not a real portal. It is something that I built in Flask using a little bit of Flask and a little bit of Python. If you want to learn more about Flask or Python, there is some documentation at the end of this deck to do so. But this video is not about those two things, it's about Okta, so let me get into talking about that, what we're going to be doing in this video, and let's get building, all right? So, what we are actually building here is a working relationship between two pieces, okay? A portal that needs an identity and Okta which can provide it. Now, the portal is again our practice app. It's just real enough to give us something to click into, okay? It has a few protected pages and it'll let us test what happens when someone leaves and comes back logging in wise. Now, Okta, that side of it is going to be again where our identity side lives and what's going to be the thing that provides proof of identity to the portal to let us log in. We're going to be able to create people, organize them into groups, and basically decide which groups are allowed to use the app. This means that the portal is not making decisions alone, it's actually making decisions using a two-part effort. Basically, it sends the user over to Okta, waits for Okta's answer, and then reacts based on the answer that's provided. Now, if the user is again known to Okta, belongs to the group that's assigned to the app, they'll get into the portal no problem. If they don't meet those conditions, they'll get that access denied, whatever screen. That is just the relationship that we're trying to strive for here. Now, the portal is going to give us somewhere to test this, and Okta is going to give us the identity and access logic that we will need to make it possible. So now we know basically what each side is responsible for. We can basically start creating the people that Okta will be checking. So let's get into that. Now, before anything else, we need to get an Okta org and we need to culminate some users to test with. Setting these up is pretty basic, but the choices that you make about deciding how many people you add and who you add can actually determine what you learn from this lab, all right? Basically, if every test uses the same user or the same kind of user, you're only ever going to know if that specific user or if that kind of user works. So what I try to do is do a setup here or an example setup that you can build off of that's using four kinds of people. Now, Maya is basically going to be our sales rep. Jordan is her manager. Cat admin is going to be the person running IT, and then Chris is a contractor. Now, the first three, based on conceptually how they're set up, are going to be able to use the portal. Chris here, Chris Morgan, is not going to be able to use it. That gap is what makes this rest of the lab worth doing and what I was talking about earlier, because you can watch Okta let some people in and then watch it stop others. You get to see how the system changes depending on what settings you put in place. Now, one thing that we want to slow down for before we get into the rest of this is talking about the activation trap. Now, you're going to be tempted to use a fake email here. If you're going to use a fake email, set up a fake email, because the thing about this setup is that in order for it to work, the email that you're setting it up with has to actually work. So do maybe some test emails or, Gmail aliases, whatever you want to do with that. Honestly, I've done it before where I've roped in a few friends and turned this into like a group lab thing, and which is really cool because you can kind of see how an actual person who's maybe not as tech savvy as you get to work this app, and you can kind of in the back of your mind be like, maybe this is some things that I would change about that, and develop your own sense of preferences. Nonetheless, whatever route you pick, the emails just have to be able to actually receive the email. Otherwise, the account never gets activated, and later on, you're going to have a whole slew of problems trying to get this thing working. So, save yourself the frustration in the first place, and just go ahead and do that. Now, if your users are in place, we can move on to talking about organizing them. So, let's get into that. Now, this is how we organize people in IAM, all right? As I've probably mentioned in a lot of different videos before, groups are how we keep access separated. Basically, instead of handing the app out to people one at a time, we sort users into groups and the app gets handed to those groups. In this lab, that means Maya, Jordan, and Cat admin all end up in groups that have the app, such as sales users, sales managers, and IT admins. Chris here is going to be the only one in the contractors group and therefore the only person who never gets the app. He is going to stay out and we want him to stay out. And as you can see, we have a clear access logic because of that. Basically, we go from user to group, group to app, app to access. And this matters here because this is also a really great troubleshooting logic. Basically, if you have a problem with access, it's going to be one of these three things that's going to be the issue. But where you start is where it's the most important. Personally, and not everybody does it this way, I start from the beginning. I check the user's account. I make sure that they're not deactivated or locked out or anything like that. Sometimes there's just settings that might be tripped up or different with a person's account due to a variety of reasons. And checking the individual account first saves you a lot of headache because nothing sucks more than sending something to applications because you think it's broken and it just turns out that the person locked themselves out. And if, again, it's not a simple thing, then check the groups. Go in and see what groups that they're a part of. Make sure that they are set up to have access because if they're not, then it's just an easy fix because all you have to do is add that person to the group. And then you don't have to go to the applications team and scream at them and be like, blah, 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 this is not working. But if neither one of those things is working, then you can determine it's not a user issue, it's not on their side, it's something going on the application's end. And you can go and look at that and try to figure it out yourself. Usually there gets to a point where something's so complex that you have to pass it off to another department. And if you get to that point, you at least have all of this stuff that you tried to back it up so that when they go to look at that, they're not just going to send the ticket back to you. But that's my advice, and that's this year. Now, again, once the people are sorted and you do all of that stuff, the next thing we need to do is introduce the portal to Okta and get this show on a road. So let's talk about that. Now, here is a step that trips people up. And that is because this is the part where the portal and Okta actually start to work together. Basically, to set it up, you create what Okta calls an app integration. That is just Okta's way of saying, here's an outside app and here's how to use me. The lab here specifically uses OIDC to do this, which that just stands for Open ID Connect. Now that name sounds super technical, but really it's just an agreement that lets the portal use Okta for sign-in. I'm not going to get into super technical about that, but if you want to look it up, the term for it is again Open ID Connect. Now, let's get into some more stuff. So, for our agreement to work, there's going to be three things that we need to line up between these two sides, the portal side and the Okta side. The portal needs to know where to send the user, and Okta needs to know which app is asking. And also, Okta needs an approved return address, which is called the redirect URI, so that it knows where it is allowed to send the user back once they've signed in. There is a matching sign out URI, but that's for logout, and I'm not really going to talk about that. I'll probably mention it once or twice, but it's not really that big of a deal if you're not really focused on the logout portion. Um, I would be because I would want the whole lab to work to show that my whole logic works, but if you're not super focused on that, don't worry about it. But once the integration is created, basically Okta hands you back two values. A client ID and a client secret. Now, those are the credentials that the portal will use to identify itself. So what you're going to do is save them somewhere. You can find them again and make sure. Please double check that. But once you do that part, there's going to be one setting that you're going to start seeing once you start picking the group-based access. They're going to get this option that might pop up that's going to be called allow everyone in your organization. Don't pick that, okay? That would basically let anybody in the organization into the portal, including Chris, which we don't want Chris to have access because he's a contractor, and that would defeat the whole point of the lab or the whole point of why we set up restrictions in the first place. What you'll do instead is basically assign the app to the three groups. There'll be an option there for that. What I really want you guys to get used to doing is clicking around in these environments and trying to figure out some of this stuff for yourself. Because I hate to always be like this about it, but quite frankly, nobody's going to teach you very much about technology. Like, I do these videos out of a kindness because quite frankly, I wish somebody had did them for me. And there's a little bit of give with that because it's like I think that the only reason I became as good at this as I am is because of my drive to want to do it. I wanted to learn information that that people in my life didn't even have access to, didn't even understand on a baseline level. So teaching you to learn this stuff but also be able to fend for yourself is to me the definition of success. So, you know, I'm trying to get to a point where I'm balancing click by click instructions with just explaining things to you guys because I don't want to do people the disservice of over explaining and then basically giving you instructions that you just print out and leave beside you at work. Because that's a habit we don't want to build because that is what makes bad analysts and that is what makes bad just technology people in general. And I don't want to feed into that quote unquote culture. But stepping off my soapbox um, for a second, but sorry, losing my train of thought today. But at this point, after we've gone through this whole slide and done all of that, Okta is going to have the other half of the agreement. And basically, all we need to now do is give um, the portal the matching half. And once this works, we'll basically have two things working together. So let's talk about this. The .env file is where the local portal gets its Okta settings. So Okta already has our app integration, and the portal just needs that matching information so that we know how to use it, basically. Now, the values inside cover the basics. There's going to be an issuer, which points the portal at the right Okta sign-in service. There's going to be the client ID and the client secret, which will be from the last step. You'll have to put that in there. You'll see all of the things that you need to fill out. But don't worry too hard about that. Now you see here, there's the redirect and logout redirect. Make sure that those URIs match what you put into Okta. And there's a port number here, as you can see, but that is just to kind of know where the app is running. Now, you don't have to memorize what each piece of this does, as long as the values themselves match what's in Okta. Now, the most common thing that's going to trip people up at this step is not the content, it's going to be the file name. Make sure that the file name is .env, just period. Like if you're on a Windows computer, I know that they can hide the file extensions. Just right click and check the properties. I always say check twice, cut once. Okay, just save yourself the pain of having to go back and troubleshoot and refigure everything out, all right? And I'm telling you, the step's not dramatic, but it genuinely does help. Now, when the portal and Okta finally start agreeing and all of this stuff runs, we can finally start actually running the app itself. So let's get into that and talk about that in the next step. All right, so we can start running our local portal. Now, the setup here uses Python and Flask, but you don't need to know either of those very well. If you would like to, though, again, there is some information at the end of this presentation that you can take a look at and get more involved in making your own portals or, making stuff that might synthesize data. There's tons of endless applications between the two programs that if you want to get into some really cool stuff, you definitely can. Now, here we're just running the project so we can have something to sign into, but you can get more involved as you go along. Now, when the app comes up at the local host, um, don't freak out. That just means that it's running on your own machine and not really anywhere else. We don't really want it on the internet because we don't really want to have to deal with like extra protection or really setting this up to be a robust app. And we also don't want to get compromised. So there's that. But the whole point of this is just basically to have a safe space to test the Okta flow, which a lot of developers do it using this method. Now, the one detail I'm going to really, really harp on is watching out for the port. Okay, again, if 8080 is already using on your machine, try to change it inside the .env file and change it in Okta. Look up some other ports. I don't really know every single port that you can use off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but you can look those up on the internet and they'll literally give you some ports that you can use for this process. Otherwise, pretty much the app is running, so we can see if our access model holds up. So let's get into that. All right. So this is where our setup proves itself. Basically, the way to think about it is there's 5 sign-ins that are supposed to happen here, and there's a right answer for each one. Maya, Jordan, and Kat, they should all land in the portal. Chris should hit a wall, and so should anyone else who's deactivated. What we're really testing here is not necessarily the sign in button. We're just testing whether Okta actually gives us the answers that we need and that the whole connection between the one side and the other are there. Now, if any of these access issues or any of the results here surprise you, please go back and go to that one slide that I was talking about when it came to the troubleshooting and going through each of the layers so that you can find out where the issue might exist in your setup. Now, there's one consistent thing that I will mention that usually tends to hang people up, and that's the log out between users. Now, Okta is a really great rememberer, but also because of that, it can suck sometimes. My recommendation is if you're testing these accounts and you're not doing it with your friends, like I recommended earlier, and you're doing it on one machine, is to open up incognito mode and test it on that version of the browser. That way, it's not accidentally remembering who you are and you're having to clear your cookies every time to do these tests. Now, if it's really a problem and you're struggling with any aspect of this lab, um, please just message me or send me a DM. I'll be more than happy to help you. But once you get this working, basically you have access and we can add MFA on top if that's what you want to do. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. All right, here we go. Now, MFA is just a fancy way of saying Okta wants more than a password before it lets somebody in. Basically, the password is your first set of proof, and the MFA is the second one. Usually something like Okta Verify, an email code, a phone prompt, or a security key. There's a whole slew of options there available on Okta, and you can take a look at those yourself. Now, the reason MFA exists is that basically passwords are not very strong on their own. There's a whole different slew of reasons for this. People reuse them across sites, they get fished out, people find them in leaks, or they just happen to guess them because your password might be easy to guess. Now, the second factor that comes in with this is that you never want a password to be the only thing standing between you and financial ruin, or between you and getting fired, or between you and like life altering consequences. I always say that the cyber world is a lot like space. Okay? And space terrifies me, okay? For a whole slew of reasons, other than aliens and all of the obvious shit. But the most obvious part is that space is scary because there's just so much of it. And it's a vacuum. So the only thing separating you from death is a very thin wall of metal. A lot thinner than I would like it to be anyway. Um, and that's what this is like. You never want a password, this thin, flimsy thing that we all know, is flawed, to be the only thing that separates you from the worst outcome that you could possibly envision. That's what MFA is, and that's what MFA is in this lab. So basically, what we'll do is it plugs into the same workflow that we've been testing. The user in this instance would go to Okta, Okta checks the password, and now it'll send a prompt or whatever else you set up as a second proof before redirecting them back to the portal. Now, we have covered everything here intentionally as basic, but hopefully you've set this up solidly enough using these instructions to actually keep poking at it and investigating on your own, because that is what I want to foster. Now, you have plenty of MFA methods to swap around. You have plenty of users to run through. So start comparing what you see in Okta with the docs in this deck and really get into what you're wanting to get into. Speaking of which, last slide here. All right. Everything you need is on this last slide. The lab kit, all of these links that'll give you some really helpful information. They pretty much say what they do. Python download. Not only will the Python download be the download page, but it'll also be where you can get to the community page, which is really helpful, and a lot of their internal docs that you can use for learning how Python works. There's some Flask options here that'll tell you how Flask works, the coding language, basically anything you might want to know. And then you have Okta Verify, the MFA, and then you have the OIDC group app integration, all of these different things here. Basically, everything in the lab listed at the end in order that you might need it. If you run into any issues, please comment, send me a DM, do whatever you can. All right. Now, I know this video might seem a little impromptu and I might be a little off. I'm just really messed up this week. I've had a lot going on. I had some sad family stuff, but it is okay now. Um, and I did record this video and it was really great the first time that I recorded it. But of course, when I went to go post it, I realized my headset was on, but my audio was off. So I had to basically re-record all of this. Now, hopefully you'll enjoy this lab kit and you'll enjoy this lab. If you have any comments, concerns, or you want me to build off of this and do another video, please let me know. I like feedback. It really helps. Makes me know which to keep and which to give away. All right. But hopefully this is all working for you. And once again, I hope you guys have a great week and I'll see you in the next one. See ya. Bye.